Hello and welcome to episode 405 of the Crate and Crowbar, a gaming podcast being recorded on the 14th of September 2022. I'm Marsh Davis. I'm joined this evening by the rightful heir to the English throne, King Jamie of Britain.
Hello.
Welcome. What's your first decree going to be now when you mount the throne of golden skulls? That is your birthright.
I think I would decree no improv on video game podcasts. No,
Superb.
I would decree that all school WhatsApp groups be outlawed because the messages that are going on in my child's class WhatsApp group are just terrifying.
Oh my god, that sounds dark and worrisome. Is it, or is it just sordid?
It's not so much sordid, it is just the facile wittering of people who've got too much time on their hands.
Wow. A perfect segue into the main discussion this evening. I'm going to talk to you about Gloomwood, Jamie.
Yes.
Which is a retro first-person sneak 'em up in the vein of Thief. Retro only really in the sense that it's quite low poly, but otherwise, as you sort of play it, you realize there isn't really anything that intrinsically old-fashioned feeling or quaint about it in action. And I was wondering if you would agree with this. I don't know if you played the early Thief games, but like the core mechanics of stealth games in general don't feel like they've changed, like in terms of the fashion of them, a great deal, like in the last 20 years, in comparison to like the constantly evolving conventions of shooters. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, it seems like the Thief games established the idea that a kind of steampunk, quasi-Victorian setting was the de facto standard setting for sneaking games, and everyone just agreed, like, yes, correct.
We see. I was thinking about like the actual sort of interaction mechanics of stealth, like light and dark. There are bodies, you can pick them up. There are enemies with predictable AI that you can duke around with sight cones. All of that stuff feels like. I mean, it can be kind of more granular than that, but essentially things exist on a quite a narrow spectrum within the stealth genre. Whereas, like the conventions of the first person shooter are very different from like the Doom and the kind of retro throwback first person shooters we're seeing now, very different from like the Call of Duty era of shooters or the Halo era of shooters.
Yeah,
maybe that's nonsense.
well, I mean, I know totally what you mean, and I do think the Thief games, are pretty fundamental to the sneaking genre. It kind of divides off into the sort of Metal Gear Solid likes, kind of vibe. But even that is kind of not so much a thing these days either. And like the Thief likes are kind of making a bit of a resurgence. Dishonored is just one of them. But like I remember seeing an interview, you can see it on YouTube, and it's the guy who, designed, one of the people who designed Thief. And he talks about how when he was a kid, like a small boy or a teenager, he snuck into like abandoned buildings in his neighborhood. And one night he went down into the basement of a building and he was all alone in the dark. And then suddenly a torchlight came on in the room, and it was a security guard who'd followed him, who'd obviously seen someone go in, and he froze in the dark. And the security guard scanned the torch backwards and forwards across the room looking for him, and then turned it off and walked away. And he managed to sort of, get away with it. And
wow.
The idea that the Thief games are basically him trying to recreate that experience. And that basically becoming the standard, like that is the moment that you want recreated in any kind of sort of stealth game, isn't it? It's like almost being caught getting away with it by your wits. And from what I played of Gloomwood, it's also, again, it's very much that vibe as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I hadn't heard that story before. That's great. I didn't realize the entire genre was spawned by a child's malfunctioning urban exploration exploits. That's pretty good. There are other reasons it doesn't feel retro either, and that's because it's quite modern in a lot of its other sort of design sensibilities. There's sort of obviously this putting this core stealth stuff aside, there's this really smart level design dare I say it, Soulsborne level design. Now, I may have forgotten this, but I think Thief originally had like save anywhere, more or less. Whereas here you have to save gramophones, which are very infrequent in the environment, and sort of to accommodate that inconvenience, the levels are designed to have these incredibly intricate, intraconnective shortcuts, such that you're constantly unlocking shortcuts back to a save point, and the sort of the stretches of unsavable challenge between those shortcuts are just like judged to be perfectly long enough to establish some real tension. And I was really impressed by it. I felt it was incredibly clever the way that these levels were structured, and it's just a remarkable feat to have that kind of very consciously gamey sort of design without turning the setting into something like a nakedly ludic pile of polygons and alleyways. um but yes, you've played a bit of it then, I guess, as you said earlier.
Yeah, I played the demo that came out a while back,
Mm.
and I've been closely following it because I loved his Dusk, the last game he did. I thought was really good. And I think one of the reasons that it's kind of called a retro game is just that the creator of this, or the co-creator of this and the creator of Dusk, he just really likes Quake, looking games. That's just very much his jam, and it's just his preferred palette. I don't think it's even necessarily a kind of retro thing. Really, it's just kind of it's the colors he likes to paint with. And yeah, I'm just very excited about it. I've heard that the early access is a little bit limited at this point, and there's a good couple of years to go on it, which is a shame because they seem to have been making it for ages. But I guess if it's just two guys and this level of complexity as you're describing, they're a long way off the finished product.
Yeah, well, I imagine they'd be a lot further off if they had to produce a game with the sort of fidelity of any engine post Quake.
Yes,
Yeah.
one of the things I loved playing, I played Thief only very recently, and I played Thief 2 recently, and there's a moment in the very first mission, I think, of Thief where you're sort of sneaking into a mansion, and there's a room you come to which is like a colossal ballroom with a grand piano on a dais at one end, and then a few tables scattered around, but it's mostly empty. It's mostly just a room you cross to go and do one of the side missions. And it was such a striking moment because normally areas in games, an area that big in most games would be where a set piece battle happens, or where some story point occurs, because it's grand and designed, but nothing happens in it. It only exists really to fill you with the sort of sense of creepiness of being in a big space on your own with potential danger around. And that was just a really unique experience playing that, like literally in the last 12 months or so. And what I played of Gloomwood, it seemed a bit less like, I don't know, there's something about Thief where the character you're playing, he feels sort of vulnerable, and he feels kind of like a character that you can kind of empathize with in his kind of Blandy McBlandyson kind of way. I
Mm.
was wondering about who you are in Gloomwood, and how that do you have that kind of sense of vulnerability, or are you just a monster in a world of more monstery monsters than you?
It's difficult to judge at this stage. I mean, there's not that much to go on about who you are in the game. You're referred to as Doctor by other characters, but clearly you have a history with this world, and there are details about that history that start to unfold. You seem to have fallen foul of the local regime, which are maybe cultists of some sort. It's hard to say, and they've infested this sort of bleak stretch of vaguely New Englandy, vaguely steampunky coastline, and you begin the game and you found you've sort of been thrown into this pit full of offal at some rickety, tottering fish processing plant on the coast, and you're there to await some grisly fate of some sort. And then you're there's some great voice acting in this, or at least it sounds like the voice actors are having tremendous amount of fun, at least, which is just as important. And the guy who rescues you from your initial circumstances has this sort of broad, I think it's a East Coast United States accent that sounds almost like a Suffolk accent. I don't know if you've heard that. It's kind of slightly piratey, but at the same time, it's got the Suffolk vibes, and the various sort of like cultish guards that are around also sort of like coughing and spluttering and wheezing all the time, and they murmur and growl in a way which is just exquisitely phlegmy. But I have digressed from your question, which is whether you are a beast in this game. And it seems like this game is kind of happier to allow you to confront people more directly. You do get access to a bunch of guns at some point. But I found direct confrontation still to be quite difficult, and you are very squishy still. So I mean, and my instinct is to play these games by just lurking around in the shadows and then poking people in the spine with a sword cane, um, which is what I've been doing. It has this sort of wind up, so you need to sort of wind up your sword cane attack to deliver a lethal blow from behind. So there is sort of like a timing element there. It's not that easy just to dart out of shadow and nobble somebody. You have to be behind them for a period of time, which means that you do then have to engage with the sort of the distraction mechanics, like you can throw bottles and stuff around, or even severed heads. And like the enemies are, the AI responds to disturbances or things being out of place in ways which are, I wouldn't say smart, but like, smart enough to be exactly predictable in the way that these games demand. That makes it a very satisfying experience. But like you say, it's only really a few hours of it that are currently available. That thing is constantly alluding to this city, which you seem to be making your way towards, and that's obviously the meat of the game. But that's currently completely off limits. So all you get at the moment in the early access is essentially this tutorial coastline to muck about in. But even then, I've been having like just a splendid time shanking people and just really like, because those environments are so kind of densely constructed. I've just been enjoying like probing every corner of them and finding new shortcuts and secrets and so forth. I don't know whether to recommend it. I assume there's some sort of early access discount. I'm satisfied to say go buy it now and get that discount, because on the basis of what I played, it will be tremendous by the time it's fully fleshed out.
Yes, and he did that with Dusk. Like he staggered the release of it, into episodes. It took quite a long time for the game to come out, but when it did, it was it's an absolutely glorious thing. Dusk, which is also a game I definitely recommend if people haven't played it too. It similarly manages to do quite a lot with very little, and even has a kind of interesting narrative that kind of develops over the course of that game. That kind of, I don't know, he's got an interesting voice, that creator, and like the way he like kind of does narrative is it's a bit like the way narrative is done in Quake, i.e. sort of not at all, or just with like bits of text that pop up on the screen, or like that sense that they've dropped in some voice acting at the last minute in order to provide context for something, but he does it in a kind of in a way that's considered. It's almost a kind of ironic take on underwritten in software games, to a purpose. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes with Gloomwood. I'm sure he'll do something along those lines.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how it expands. Talking of another game which has expanded beyond its initial bounds copiously, I hear you've been playing No Man's Sky.
No Man's Sky, yeah. Like, this is a game, obviously, I'm sure everyone listening knows about the kind of history of No Man's Sky. It came out in, I think, 2016, and was, it was this game that we were all incredibly excited about. And then when it came out, it was kind of a little bit limited. And, I actually enjoyed the game when it came out. I found it to be a kind of really sort of good chill out experience. I remember I just had my first child at that point, and I was just completely sleep deprived and exhausted. And being able to sort of get in a spaceship and fly around to these kind of candy coloured planets um, was kind of really quite chill and fun. Um, uh, to a point. After a while, trying to find stuff to fill up your fucking bolt caster or whatever was kind of infuriating. And I more or less haven't been back to it since. I think I put 30 hours into it in that first time, and it was 30 hours I was really pleased with, and then I was just kind of done and on to other things. So booting it up recently, God, they have they have really gone to town on that game. And it's true what people say about it, which is it absolutely now provides the experience that it was supposed to have done when it was first released. They have just stuffed the game full of content to the point that you're kind of spoiled for choice about what you do, which almost makes it feel like sort of Skyrim in space, which I think was what people really wanted from it. So they've done a really good job of structuring the experience now so that you're introduced to things that you can do and places that you can go and stuff that you can engage with or not, and you're just given the kind of the right prods in the right direction to kind of express yourself and do what you want to do. So I've played it, for a good, I don't know, maybe 20 hours in the last few weeks. And what's so good about it is that it's a sandbox experience that gives you, like I say, that's very good at giving you opportunity to express yourself, but never forcing you in one particular direction, which I think is a really difficult thing to balance, because if you make a world too free and easy, then people just get bored and wandered off. But if you make it too full of collect quests and faffy procedurally generated tasks, it just feels thin and kind of empty, really. In the whole universe at your disposal, and it ends up feeling like just very, very thinly spread. And so with each expansion that they've done and all the stuff that they've added, they've just solved that problem. Basically, it's now a game that it's a pleasure to play. You boot it up and you can genuinely think to yourself, oh, what do I want to do now? Do I want to work towards buying a space car to drive around on this planet with, or do I want to just try and make loads and loads of money by going mining, or do I want to do some space battles, or do I want to I found myself protecting a settlement from kind of outside invaders, and then trying to find the right ingredients to sort of protect their town. It's got that funny thing where you arrive at a town under siege, and the sentinels attacking this little settlement, and you help them fend off the sentinels, and then they say, thanks for doing that, you're now the mayor of this town. And you're responsible for all our problems, thank you. And so that's what you do. And previous, obviously those experiences weren't in the game at all at the start, but stuff like being able to drop into some combat if you wanted to do the space combat, that's now available to you. And so, yeah, like I say, it just ends up being a real joy to play, and with such a wide array of stuff on offer. I found myself getting into owning a freighter. You can now get a freighter. Again, actually, you can buy one, but in my game, I went through a black hole. There was a big pirate space fight going on with some pirates trying to blow up, or I guess raid a big freighter ship. And I helped fight them off. And they said, great, you're now the captain of the freighter. Well done. And you can now send your freighter off on missions. And then, so you can basically have a whole armada of trade vessels going backwards and forwards along trade routes and carrying out missions. And, and you can also build your own base on the freighter. And if you stand on a planet and look up at the sky, you can summon your freighter into the sky above you and then fly up to it in your spaceship. And it's just it's great. It's such a I guess what I like about it is that it's a very specific world. It's a very specific vision of space. It doesn't feel like the Elite Dangerous kind of take on these things, which is much more generic and much more a much more general fantasy about space. Although I do think that game is extraordinary in its own way. Whereas No Man's Sky, it feels like this is our weird and wonderful fantasy version of the universe, and we're going to show you our weird take on it. And eventually, it's going to kind of win you over with its charm. I think it's a very charming game, and it does it by sort of a slow osmosis. And I think that's interesting, given that it was a game that people were really turned off by at launch, and now it's if you come to it fresh now, having never played it before, it's full of charm and character and a sense of humor and all sorts
that's
of stuff
interesting.
like that. And it also just feels really populated. You can now drop into multiplayer really easily. The little gribbly aliens that you bump into are characterful enough to kind of not just feel like a bunch of red shirts. And it also just can't be overstated how good the procedural generation can be in that game. Like, really extraordinary vistas. Even just playing it on the Steam Deck, which isn't really a graphical powerhouse. I have my base on an ice moon, orbiting, in the rings of the dust rings of an enormous, giant planet. And the view when I step out of my base is it's properly breathtaking. It's properly amazing, and it never gets old. And that is a wonderful thing, I think. Yeah, so kudos to them. They've filled the game with stuff to do, and in doing so, kind of solved every problem it had. I think.
Amazing. I mean, how does it orient you? Because one of the things I felt about it playing it originally was that it had it didn't do a great job of really telling you what to do, and all the things that it promised that you could do seemed quite arduous. I
Yeah, and
assume that's changed, but I mean, does it give you a specific direction now, which is kind of more fruitful immediately?
it gives you several. It gives you several directions that you can head in, and it kind of tells you the ones which are the kind of main story ones, and it tells you the ones which are the slightly less important story ones. I mean, when the game first launched, you wake up next to a broken spaceship, and in my first playthrough of the game, it was an absolute pitched battle to try and collect enough resources before I died of exposure on this planet. It was actually an amazing experience the first time I booted up No Man's Sky, because it just so happened it loaded me into a world where there was only just enough of resources, and they were spread out so far that I made it by the skin of my teeth. Whereas for a lot of people, I think booting up No Man's Sky for the first time, it was just a bit tedious. They still do that, but they get you up into space nice and quick, and the game just opens out really quickly. The resources are less demanding to get you started. You have to kind of hit a couple of plot points, but the rewards and the kind of incentives for following those things are also kind of frictionless. So you can imagine not really struggling to if you were starting up a new character or playing through things again, it wouldn't be so bad, because as well as this, the fact that the procedural generation is always on the go, you're never seeing anything. You're never having to repeat the same worlds over. So yeah, they've just they've taken out all those barriers now, and they've also done stuff I mean, I tried booting up the game in free mode, when I last tried in creative mode, sorry, which just obviates all the need for resources and just gives you unlimited stuff to do with as you please. And actually, that runs out of charm very quickly. You do need the. I mean, I guess if you're really into base building and stuff like that, or just pure exploration, which I guess I thought I would be interested in. I was just, I'll just be um, I'll be like a star child flying through the cosmos. It's Olaf Stapledon, Star Maker Janie. But actually, that ends up being quite tedious. So you do need the game, I think, to kind of make those vistas worth it. And I think that was the problem with No Man's Sky when it first came out, is that it didn't feel like your efforts were to to any kind of real reward beyond
Hmm.
this is what the prop gens come up with now. This is what the prop gens come up with now. But now there's a whole bunch of stuff going on that makes it really worth it. I think. I'd also point out the music is still fantastic by 65 Days of Static. These lovely kind of sort of major chord staticky electro ambient stuff with occasional kind of uh, uh, atonal honks, which appear to be a relatively new addition, but are very welcome to me.
You're always welcome in an atonal honk.
I love an atonal honk. And like also, you can feed the animals and ride them around. Like I've got a horrible dog, like a really awful dog that I was just trying out, the feed them, train the mechanic on it, and I get on the dog and ride it around. It can run much slower than me, and also like because it's got like the way it's shaped, it's kind of like a snake dog. I am riding like not on its back really, but like right up on its neck, like on its shoulders, which just looks very strange. I look like a weird spaceman centaur abomination.
Is that
But
like a designated mount animal, or can you tame and ride any
you
any of
can
the ProcGen beasts?
you can kind of tame and ride pretty much any of them, which can be very funny because some of them are extraordinary, like weird crab, like floaty blob things, and you can like here you go, little buddy, and you can feed it a little treat, and then it will become your friend, and then you can summon it when you land on a planet and sort of ride it around like a horrible horse. It's it's great. It's great. It's really funny and stupid and good. And they've just made pretty much everything rideable, mountable. Yeah. And it's great. You got a horrible dog, and you can land on some like hostile planet. And like, I know what I need here. My horrible dog. I'm going to summon him. And they've made that frictionless as well. You can just summon your horrible dog from across on the other side of the galaxy and go on adventures together.
I'm interested what you said about it having a personality now, because at launch, I mean, it had a very distinct and absolutely beautiful visual style, for sure. And there was writing in the game which was characterful and interesting, but sort of there was something about the way it approached ProcGen that sort of ended up sort of like sapping like character, I guess, from the game, because if everything felt slightly kind of clean and beautiful, but also slightly sterile in a way. And you're saying now that there's a real personality and humor to it.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think I think there's not that big of a divide. I think from a game feeling like procedural porridge, where everything's just a little bit uniform and similar to each other. I actually don't think it's too far to go from that to something feeling, it's still the same building blocks they're using in it. It's still a bunch of weird gribbly aliens, and you have to work out their language, and they sort of hang around in a space station. Kind of, it's there's nothing. There are characters in this game now, and there are storylines in this game, and the characters feel well written and well conceived. There's still no, like voiced characters or anything like that. Um, I think it's been tuned very carefully, is what I think. I think they've been very diligent in what they've added to it, so to not make the whole sort of pot boil over and become overwhelming. You're still going to these weird, slightly empty feeling star bases and things like that. But yeah, like I say, they've just tuned it up to the right degree where it feels like an actual space. Um, and I think that is part of it. Must be one of the reasons why rolling out these features slowly over the course of several years. I guess they can think very long and hard about what they put in and that sort of thing. And I think that's you know I assume that what they did when the game came out was to think, well, we've got this big canvas now, and let's treat it like that, and then let's slowly and deliberately add to it, and that seems to have worked very well. It just seems, it still seems kind of like it's got these impossible, these impossibly enormous potential in it, without seeming anonymous. Yeah, and I think it's it's really fun. I'm going to play it a whole bunch more. I think it makes me, I don't like crafting in video games. It's tedious, but for some reason in No Man's Sky, again, they've made it easy to kind of, whatever you want to make, you can pin the recipe to your, UI, and it will not only just tell you the ingredients, it will give you the steps that you need to go through in order to get those ingredients. It really kind of holds your hand. And me, an idiot, really appreciates that because, I can't hold more than one idea in my head at
No,
once.
likewise. Yeah, these games with like abstract recipes are just absolute horror show for me. I can't, just can't cope with that. I mean, I can't really stand crafting at all. Like, I don't know whether it's just having, worked at Mojang or Minecraft has put me off it forever. But I do see what you're saying about that sort of the survival-ish element being a necessary engine for you to find pleasure in the rest of the game. I think if I just spoiled myself by going to the free create mode, I probably would find it unsatisfactory.
Yeah, it just feels a little bit too. I mean, I think people find similar things with Minecraft. I mean, I've tried playing Minecraft on creative mode, and I often find myself feeling like I'm just sort of, yeah, I'm missing out on something. Well, I mean, it means you don't have to explore so much, and exploration is, whenever I've played Minecraft, that's the thing I enjoy most about those games. The idea that you've got this space that is just yours. Um, and I think No Man's Sky has drilled down and down on that fantasy a lot now, so that you do have this universe that there are other people in it if you want them to be, but ultimately you can build your little dream log cabin on some disgustingly horrible like fart planet, and have a little underwater base there, and make sure you've got your fart protection clothes so you can go for a morning constitutional roundup with your horrible dog. If that is your fantasy, you can do that. And I think there's no other game like that really. There's nothing that comes close even, um, to kind of having that potential to it. And I think they're probably just going to keep going and keep adding to it. I imagine, and I think there's all sorts of stuff that they could do that I think would make it an even more attractive kind of space to spend time in that kind of Minecraft Fortnite kind of way. It's not so much a social game at the moment, but I think it will probably become. I mean, I'm sure it is for some people. It's not for me because I'm kind of, that's a little bit distant, that stuff. But you can imagine it becoming even bigger as the years go by.
Huh. I don't know what kind of monetization they have. Do they have like a subscription sort of aspect to it?
No, they don't. Like it. They've never charged for any of their many updates,
Huh.
which have increased the size of the game probably 5 times in terms of the amount of content there is there. I think they. I mean, as people have said, they took all that goodwill money that people paid for it when it came out and decided to invest it back into the game itself. And I assume people still buy it. I mean, I rebought it, because I had it on PlayStation. I rebought it on Steam, and it was £20, and it was definitely worth it because it is a different game than it was. It's worth that money for sure.
Interesting.
That feeling of landing on a planet and not knowing what you're going to find there and what it's going to look like, that is like a little miracle of game design. It never fails to kind of, you'll land on a planet and it'll look kind of crap, and then you'll walk up a hill and the view will open out beneath you, and you'll see some stunning there's one that was like a kind of series of like lovely almost like Caribbean island archipelago sort of stretching out in front of me with little frog monsters hopping around in it. And it's just fantastic.
How many new sites do you need to see before you just become kind of blasé about it? Because that is always the thing with procedural generation. You hit the randomize button enough, and you start just thinking, oh yeah, oh whatever, it's another giant goose creature with horns on its ass, whatever.
Yeah, I mean the animals in particular are they're kind of unimpressive. You know, they still never really gotten around how to procedurally generate animals that basically aren't either dogs, kangaroo monsters, or like big gribbly crab insects. You know, they do have a few like disgusting floating like blob monsters and things like that. And I believe there might be like dragons in the game now. I haven't find one of those
Okay.
yet. So there's a whole bunch of stuff like that in there. But everything does look like the creatures that you make in that like spore. They are fuck it, that'll do. And then it's like all the animals that everyone ever created in spore. Sort of slipped through a hole in space time and ended up in No Man's Sky. Um, because they are shite, yeah. But they're kind of charming, and as I say, you can ride them.
That does make up for an awful lot
It really
of
does.
sins.
It's like the animals in our, here on this planet, our animals are all shit. However, they will let you ride them.
Sounds cool. Probably won't play it.
No. Well, You don't want to craft some carbon nanotubes and then fly up to a space station and sell them to craft a product, and then realize that the same stuff you used to make them was actually the thing you needed in the first place.
That's the dream, isn't it? Though that's the
Absolutely,
dream.
it simulates being a human being in 20.
I have also been playing a puzzle game
Ooh,
called. I actually have to bring up my notes because literally every time I've tried to think about this game, I've forgotten its name. Taiji? Taiji. It may mean something to somebody, but it doesn't mean anything to me. However, it's quite good. It's sort of like The Witness, but in pixely 2 dimensions. You're this little pixel person on a sprawling pixel island of many different biomes, and each biome area explores a sort of different spin on the same core puzzle design. So, like in The Witness, you were going around this island, and each area would have all these sort of panels that were kind of like joined up to each other, like electronic panels, and you'd draw lines across the grids on these panels as per whatever the demands of the individual puzzle was. And that was the sort of like the fundamental interaction of all the Witnesses puzzles, was drawing these lines across these grids, tracing lines across grids. And here you have grids on panels, but instead of tracing lines through them, you're sort of designating the individual squares on those grids to be either black or white, like sort of like Picross, basically. Um, and once you've satisfied that you've flipped to the right pixels, you press space and it's either correct and the next puzzle lights up, or you fundamentally haven't understood something about the puzzle, which is the more frequent result for me. And you have to think harder about the rules for that section of the island. So there's sort of like often you're sort of replicating things, replicating a pattern based on sort of like cryptic instructions through sort of like symbology. So certain puzzles you'll be given these cryptic instructions which are sort of squares with a dot in them, and that sort of means that um, certain squares on your grid need to be colored in or not colored in, and then they'll throw extra conditions upon that by saying, well, actually you can't flip these particular squares, and it becomes much more and more complicated. I would say it's not quite as good at tutorializing as The Witness was. I've sort of stumbled headlong through puzzles, getting them correct, but not at all understanding why, um, which hasn't been great. And there's sort of a sense of deflation once you get through an area, because it just sort of. Whereas The Witness was quite intentionally building towards something. When you finish an area, there's this very kind of grand animation as this giant sort of laser tower erupts and then beams at the central point. You always feel like you're doing something, building towards something. Here, you sort of just you just exit the section and you're back more or less where you were again. I don't know that it's quite doing enough to pull me through all these different puzzle areas yet. And some of the puzzle design I'm a bit suspicious of. Always reticent to criticize puzzle design because it could be that I'm just quite stupid. But there do seem to be things that are visually not that apposite, I think, in terms of the way that the instructions have been designed to communicate to you what you're meant to be doing. But I did want to plug it because it is a pretty accomplished and seemingly massive puzzle game, and I do like those. So.
It's funny. It's funny you should mention, like, the brute forcing puzzles where you don't quite get the reason, because you don't really get why you've solved it. You just know you have. Whereas, like, the witness is very good at saying to you, right, do you understand how this works? And you say yes. And then the game says, do you really understand it? And then, no, I really don't. Like, that was a complete fluke. And the witness is very good at building in, like, redundancy for your stupidity, in order to make sure you understand something before you move on, which is a very Jonathan Way blow of doing it. But
I feel that doesn't have that safety net here. It often, like, puzzles are just an escalating sequence of new additional rules, before you've really had a chance for any of the rules to bed in. And I mean, that's kind of a challenge in itself, but also when you come back to the puzzles later on, or you encounter those same mechanics elsewhere, it's just very easy to have forgotten what they mean because they're not sufficiently drilled into you. That's frustrating. I did find that occasionally in The Witness as well, but that's that's what YouTube walkthroughs are for, I guess.
Absolutely.
Did you also want to talk about Crusader Kings, Jamie?
Yeah, I'll talk about it a little bit. I'll talk about it in the context of being bad at Crusader Kings 3. Because I like listening to the 3 Moves Ahead podcast, and I like listening to podcasts where people who know what they're doing talk about the amazing emergent narratives they get out of games like Dwarf Fortress or Crusader Kings. And I'm always kind of desperate to have those experiences. And they're often quite hard to get at, because the games are often quite mechanically complicated, or they're mechanically complicated, or you just have to, like, really, really know what you're doing, and what you're working towards, and kind of in a very particular mindset to kind of extract the great stories out of these things that other people seem to kind of come across every single time they fire up the game. Yeah. So I've always been in search of that because I love a good emergent narrative, and like I say, they're always a little bit elusive, and I often have to kind of vicariously experience them through others, like on YouTube or Twitch or whatever. However, I would say that Crusader Kings 3 is by far and away the most accessible version of that experience. Like, I played a fair bit of CK2, and really enjoyed it, but probably never really had that many experiences that I could tell as a story. It was always a little bit too hard for me to grasp, and it would end up kind of getting out of my control, and I'd lose a war because I didn't know how warfare worked in that game, and I just kind of, there's a horrible moment that can happen in Crusader Kings type games where you suddenly see behind the matrix. You suddenly see behind everything, and you just think, oh, this is just a fucking bunch of, like, numbers smacking together. These aren't real people, these aren't real stories. I want my procedurally generated EastEnders, and this isn't even procedurally generated Hollyoaks. It's just kind of really, like, fake. And so, but with Crusader Kings 3, which I've been playing off and on since release, I've had a much better time with it, mainly because, and again, like, is sort of part of my character as a gamer, I guess, is that they take away a lot of the friction between you and the game and make it much easier for the character you play in the game to feel like as an extension of you. And they do it in various ways. It's got this kind of godlike hypertext system, so that whenever you're wanting to do something or you're hovering over something, it will give you, the keywords are written in bold, and if you mouse over them, it will explain those words, those terms to you, and what that means for you, or what sort of choice that means for you. And then often those bits of hypertext also have terminology within them, and you can mouse over those as well. So you can go down many layers of explanation and tutorial without breaking up the flow of the game by having to like read a separate piece of UI that explains it, or try and fumble your way through. Which for me, I have dyspraxia, and as I say, I can't hold more than one idea in my head at the same time. I have particular problems around organizing disparate thoughts, and so for me, that is just a lifesaver, because it basically says, here is what this is, here are the choices you can make around it, um, and why that's important to your character. Um, yeah, so I find that a huge help, and they've really recognised, I think, that one of the reasons people play Crusader Kings is so that they can have these experiences. Still, though, I'm not good enough at the game for things to get too complex or get too out of hand, really. But I find that if I bring myself to bear on the game, and I just bring my own like sense of role play to it, and my own sort of sense of character to it, I get a lot more out of it. So, for example, the most recent campaign I played was as a king of Scotland, and this king was a good guy. He was an all-round nice fellow, treated his subjects fairly, um, and didn't have affairs, but he was desperate to create the kingdom of Scotland. And in order to do that, I needed to commit one small murder. I needed to do, as this king had to do one murder in order to, by degrees, take over the final part of Scotland that would order him to create the de jure kingdom of Scotland, rather than it being this kind of, I can't even remember the terminology, but it's like, the barony or the duchy of Scotland. We want to create the kingdom of Scotland. And that was his life's work. And he eventually did it. And he did have to murder one Norwegian guy to do it. And that
want
was...
to make an omelette. Got to kill some Norwegians.
Absolutely. So that drove him to drink, which eventually drove him to die from alcoholism. Because because you have these like traits for your character. So that king was like honest or good or whatever, and that means that every time he does something evil, like kill someone, like assassinate someone, his stress goes through the roof. And when you take on stress, you get various choices as how he deals with that stress. And I chose drinking, so he drank himself to death. This good king, over guilt of killing this Norwegian dude. Now, but he did manage to create the Kingdom of Scotland. So great, we've won a whole bunch of prestige and influence and money for doing that. And I as a player feel good, because that's the thing I've been working for across this entire character's lifetime. And so I start playing as the heir to that guy, and the heir is his father's son, but he's also a brilliant strategist. So I was like, this is going to be the guy. I've groomed him as he growed up to be this, to want to uphold his father's, dream of a united Scotland, and and he's going to be shrewd enough and clever enough to not spill huge amounts of blood in order to, keep this place going. But unfortunately, he also has 4 horrible brothers who hate him and are all absolute bastards in the way of Scottish kings' brothers from history. They all despise him. And very soon after my character becomes king and takes up the throne, they come to him as a group of his most powerful vassals and say, we hate you so much that we are going to break up this kingdom into its disparate parts rather than having you be its king. So we're going to lower the crown authority, which basically means that you're going to be bussed back down to our equivalent, and then we're going to go into we're going to war with each other in order to see which of us can become the king of the kind of what once was the kingdom of Scotland. And so like that was just like over a couple of play sessions. And what happened was that whole country, the whole of Scotland, erupted into war. The character I was playing as got turned into just a kind of baron who basically had like some shitty bit of like fief or something, and then all the other vassals had much more. And I was like, "Oh, this feels like a failure. Like everything my father fought for, I have lost in an instant. The moment the rain, came to me." But the
Good
brilliant,
story, though.
yeah, it's a good story, and it's quite a basic ass story, but like it's characterful enough. And the thing is, and the genius thing they've done, and I can't remember if you could do this in CK2, but it definitely make it easy in CK3, is I got bumped down to just some shitty baron from being king. But then what you can do is you can transfer over to any other character in your dynasty and play as them. So after I'd kind of told that story there, of that character, I was like, right, I am now going to play in the same setting on the same map with the same characters as the shittiest of those brothers, the worst of them. And now I'm going to play as him, because the aim of the game is to just keep your dynasty alive. It doesn't matter who you play in it. And I think that for me was the moment where I was like, okay, I can kind of like avoid that feeling of sort of seeing behind the matrix now, because whenever anything gets too boring, or if I ever feel like I'm at a dead end, I can just switch over to another character and it's a different episode of EastEnders. It's following a different lead character, and the character that you played obviously is still a character in that story, but you're going off in a different direction now, and you've got the fun of like, all right, this character is an absolute, see you next Tuesday, he's going to murder everyone, and you can sort of play at that fantasy, and you can see how that kind of works. And so, yeah, I was just, I found that really enjoyable, because it means you can fail, as my character very much did, but then keep rolling that failure into your soap opera and seeing where it's gonna take you.
That's cool. Do you jump in at the point at which you sort of abandon the previous plot, or can you go back in time and sort of re-enter the narrative as an alternative character earlier?
I mean, I think you could literally just reload an earlier save and do exactly that. Yeah, I think you're able to change to any character in the world at any time.
Oh wow!
I think you can do that. You can certainly change to any character in your dynasty, and I think Paradox want you to do that, because it kind of means you can roll on for for kind of a much longer time than if you kind of, because it's a very easy game to give up when you've lost the Kingdom of Scotland. It's like, well, this feels like a fail state.
I keep on meaning to get into Crusader Kings. It's like the game that I most want to get into, alongside things like Dwarf Fortress or these other sort of story-generating games. I always feel like when I give it a go, and actually I got further with Crusader Kings 3 than I ever have done with its predecessors, because, like you say, it's a lot, very good at explaining itself, and it's quite streamlined in a lot of ways. But it still takes quite a lot of time to squeeze out a good story from it, and my impatience with it isn't with the game itself. It's comparing my own experiences with the good stories that I've been told by other people. And as soon as Graham always plays these sorts of games, and he comes out with amazing kind of exotic tales of absolute insane shitfuckery, the most lurid possible absurd things. I never managed to get anything that feels quite as exotic or interesting quickly enough, and then I just feel like, well, what's the point? I could just read an article about it, or just DM Graham or something if I wanted to get a good story. This is a problem with me, Jamie. It's not a problem with the game. I should just get over it and actually just enjoy the playing of it. But because they are such renowned sort of sources of fun game anecdotes, I feel like if I'm not getting a fun game anecdote instantaneously, that what's the point?
Yeah, and they do occasionally when you're playing them. They do. I mean, for me, like I do think you get out what you put into them. And like what I'm willing to put into a game like Crusader Kings, the best story I'm going to get out of it is a fairly standard, like the story I just told is like a pretty basic ass history story. Like if someone came up to you in the street and put a gun to your head and said, "Come up with a history story about kings," you'd probably come up with that one. Be the first one you went to. Whereas, yeah, all the kind of crazy Byzantine stuff about and then I ate the Pope type stories that people are able to tell about CK3, those feel completely remote to me, and I'd love to get at them, but I do think there is a slight barrier in terms of you have to have the right kind of headspace for it, and you also have to be good enough at the game to kind of take it off in truly weird directions. Um, yeah, so I do very much empathise with that feeling. Actually, there was one other funny thing that happened, which was I had a courtier. They've got this royal court expansion that came out, which is quite cool because you get your throne room where all the characters and who are at your court are rendered, in this room, and you can hold court, and people will come and petition you for various things, and you can put your big artifacts in there to show off and kind of stuff like that. And I think it was part of that expansion that I was able to make one of my, I think it was one of my like least favorite vassals into my court fool, and she was kind of would turn up periodically through my play. With all sorts of Shakespearean japes and stuff like that. And there was one moment where she burst into the courtroom chasing another one of my courtiers. Being chased by another one of my courtiers, and she'd stolen her clothes. And part of the character design in CK3 is that the character, it features nudity, so it was a topless woman being chased by a fool through my court, screaming to have her clothes given back to her, which was really funny in and of itself. And then years later, in that same game, my king was like drinking and falling into a deep depression, and he was visited by the courtier, that same courtier, who told him that she understood his pain and that she wanted to be a closer friend to him. But she still she still didn't have her clothes on. She, the fool apparently had never given them back, and like 15 years had passed with this poor lady just being topless at court, and that sort of thing is just really, really funny. The fact that they thought about that and to include, that this character basically now has the trait naked because the fool stole her clothes, and that was just really funny because they both had such serious expressions on their faces. It was just like, listen, Karen, it's nice that you care, but we really need to talk about getting you some new clothes.
I've also been playing Immortality, Jamie, which you love so much.
Yeah.
I listened to last week's episode, and it was a really good discussion. And I imagine we will do some deeper, more spoilery chat about it at some point. I think we can avoid spoilers. I did want to get your opinion on a few things and sort of dig into stuff a little bit more, but without sort of like blowing the entire kind of idea of the game. But I don't think I loved it quite as much as you did. I had a great time with it. I really enjoyed it, and as I have all of the games from Half Mermaid and San Barlo, I don't think it quite worked as well for me at like a really sort of pernickety mechanical level than some of his previous games. But there's sort of a trade-off because there are things I really admired about it as well, which couldn't be done in the previous games. But by doing them in this one, they also tied themselves into like a less satisfying loop of discovery, I would say. So I mean the previous games have all been word input based. So you're watching these clips and you have an idea of a subject matter that you wish to see more clips of, and you type in a word, and then a certain number of clips appear that contain that word. And the past games have sort of done this kind of slightly cute way of saying, oh, you're using a sort of like a very old computing database system here, so we can only give you 5 results based on any kind of word input you give, and so that kind of limits your ability to just expose the plot instantaneously. But with this one, it switches to a visual interaction. So you're clicking on things within the clip, like items and faces and so forth. And then it's match cutting you with other clips that contain either the same or similar items. But it obfuscates that it's not giving you the full number of those clips. It's only unlocking one at a time, and then you quite quickly find that sort of tops out. You start looping back, so you can't just click on an actor's face endlessly and get every single clip that actor has appeared in. It sort of tops out, and then you're looping back on the clips you've already seen. You have to find some other way to get into those other clips. And like, on the one hand, that is they I felt like they needed to change that interaction up. There was only so many times they could use the sort of word search metaphor before it became kind of just too transparent. And I think that the choice of going for like this visual match cut is very apposite for the medium of cinema that they're discussing, and it also feels kind of luxuriously metaphorical. You've got these. You're not just clicking on. You're not just typing in like murder or whatever. You're clicking on a pool of blood, and then you'll see kind of all the other kind of things that either like blood like or spillages and things like that, and that's quite exciting because there's a sort of inexactness there with the way it matches things, which invites metaphor. But I also don't think it's that useful as like a means of pulling apart a mystery. And I feel like at a certain point, I mean, obviously it'd be just too powerful to click the lead lady's face and just get every clip of her unlocked instantly. But then I quickly found that I was a point where it was just more fruitful to click on fairly random stuff like cigarettes and wine glasses and slices of cucumber or whatever. And then finally, you'd stumble across like a pivotal scene based on a kind of match cut that you couldn't possibly have had any logic for choosing to get to that point. And I think Sam Barlow said something on Twitter about how his approach to this was Ballardian, in that Ballard invited readers of his novels perhaps not even to begin at the beginning, but just to flick through the pages until some words caught their interest, and then just to sort of scrabble around finding other things that were interesting and sort of like spread out in a non-linear way. And I think Immortality attempts to do something similar. That it's actually sort of downplays the mystery side of the game altogether, unless you read any of the PR bump or watched any of the trailers. The game itself doesn't give you any kind of prompt question to follow as you get into this. And so I suspect that that's sort of intentional, that it's part of the design ethos, that you're just sort of like moving through this montage of cinema moments and backstage moments and interviews and so forth, and just feeling your way to something that interests you. But I also found that lack of direction quite frustrating when it rubbed up against my own desire to unravel certain things and then not really having the tools to pursue them.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing that her story does exquisitely, uh, I think, is that it gates progress through the game based on your understanding of the mystery, and it requires you to make logical leaps or logical connections, which then open up a new vocabulary of words for you to explore and combine with other words, and that makes it into a true kind of game. It's a mystery game. And I remember at the time, lots of people said it gives you you really do feel like a detective playing it, in a way that no other game is probably quite managed, because of how it's only your knowledge and your understanding of the story that can allow you to proceed. And I would agree that Immortality basically abandons that concept. It doesn't really use the match cutting mechanic to. You can't use it in a directed way. It's always pretty much a random roll. as to where it's going to lead you. And the game kind of, the story of the game kind of unfolds chaotically and randomly, whereas her story, and to an extent Telling Lies, both, certainly when I played them, they unfold with exquisite precision. Even though you could plausibly type in the right keywords as soon as you fired up the game and get the ending and get the twist, it was still insanely well designed to prevent you from doing that and to give you a story essentially with a beginning and a middle and end. And Immortality, I think, doesn't do that, and it means that I think it's a game that has exquisite storytelling across its kind of background story. Like, how these three movies were made, who the people were who made them, what their relationships were like, what the world was like around them. I think those things are all rendered pretty flawlessly. But I think what the game lacks, because it doesn't have a kind of concrete way of uncovering a story, is that the narrative, the actual story, the actual what is this game about, and what is the actual beats of this mystery. That is probably the weakest element, and the kind of meta narrative that emerges as you go, which I won't spoil, is actually a little bit too simplistic to the it's a bit too simplistic compared to the amazing kind of vibes and mise en scène and deployment of these period details that make that facet of it such a kind of perfume joy. As I said to you earlier, it's like hearing the Berlin Philharmonic playing some exquisite Wagner, and then someone doing a solo with a Swanee whistle on top. It's just kind of, the narrative thrust is just a little bit too simplistic and thin and easy. And also, I'd say reading through, I read the review of it. I think it was on Rock Paper Shotgun or perhaps Eurogamer, written by a female reviewer who talked a little bit about the game's portrayal of women and the game's portrayal of sex, and it's a lot of nudity in the game, and talking about Barlow's Barlow's attitude to those things, which I won't argue here. I think she makes very good points. I think that that is the problem that the game has, though, is that when you're building a lot of when your game is really the game is good because of the vibes, the game is good because of the sense of verisimilitude, and the performances are so good. But if you're telling a story that is essentially about the way we look at people and the way we sort of steal from their souls by putting a camera on them and stuff like that, you're running the risk of being a little bit retrograde and being a little bit, running the risk of being like a kind of cheap erotic thriller, which I don't think Immortality is. But there are certainly tropes to that kind of, it's the sort of thing that Hitchcock was playing with. It's the sort of thing that Brian De Palma was playing with in his kind of, tributes to Hitchcock, and that kind of. I don't really know what I'm getting at, really. I guess I think, it's a story of an actress, and it's the story of what she kind of gives away of herself. And it's beautifully told, but I do think, thinking back on it and sort of reading some other perspectives, that because of the way the story unfolds, we're running the risk of it being on the verge of kind of a way of looking at women and their bodies in particular that I feel a bit uncomfortable with.
Oh, for sure. I mean, well, one of the things you can match cut are nude female bodies, and I obviously that is intentional, and there is. I insist that is not something I discovered initially. That was a last resort after I'd clicked on everything. But I don't think it makes a good case for that stuff.
No, it's tricky. She's one of those characters who, and I'll be careful now not to spoil it. I think, but like she is a character who is very available sexually to the men around her, and is an enthusiastic, kind of participant in all sorts of shenanigans. There's one scene where I think she's just taking a kind of moment with a friend of the director or one of the backers of the movie, and she has a photo taken with him, and she just casually exposes her breast for the picture with him. And obviously, without spoiling anything, the nature of that character is more than just as it first appears. But that is a troubling world to be telling a story about, and it's the sort of stuff that David Lynch has spent a lot of time thinking about, and that idea of women on film as creations of men and as sort of objects of desire that are also, a kind of a portal for everything that is unexpressible or inexpressible or difficult to articulate. These are all like tropes that are problematic and are tricky, and you really better know what you're doing when you go into them, because you run the risk of doing that thing of like, let's portray women as these kind of like erotic priestesses of sexual gnosis, where you're just kind of reducing them to mystical beings who exist to kind of service your own spiritual advancement.
I mean, at best, otherwise it's just body parts.
Yeah, and the body parts are just there. Yeah, and she has her boobs out when it happens. It's like you have to be so careful with that. I think for me, ultimately, the game manages to. I think the game is trying to address that. It's risky waters.
I think had that kind of the idea of the sexploitation stuff been contained within the narrative, that would have. I would still find it. I would still have questions about it. I'd be interested to read the article you mentioned earlier, but the fact that it bleeds over into a necessary aspect of the browsing interface is something that is doesn't meet the kind of required level of defense. I think because I'd essentially run into a brick wall in my pursuit of discovering things. I was resurfacing the same clips again and again. I was getting quite frustrated, and then in desperation, I clicked on a boob, and boob search turned out to be inordinately powerful in surfacing clips that I had not previously seen, and it felt like. It felt like that Dishonored moment where, it's wagging its finger at you saying, naughty, naughty, you shouldn't be using violence. By the way, here's the most powerful tool in the game. Try not to enjoy it. And I felt there was a sort of inherent level of hypocrisy in the way that interface facilitated unlocking the story through something that I didn't particularly want to do. I felt like I was being chided for it at the same time as it becoming increasingly necessary to my own investigation.
Marsh Davies, boob detective.
But I did want to talk to you about the individual films themselves, or rather just the way that they've been constructed to pastiche very specific and quite interesting moments of cinema. Because I found that to be the most enjoyable part of the game, really. The meta narrative, I think, there is something interesting going on there. whether the sheer volume of clips that are available to you and the opacity of the discovery mechanism, that sort of outlasted my desire to really dig into the meta narrative, which is harder to kind of discover. Um, so maybe that means the meta narrative was not sufficiently kind of enriching to keep me going, or maybe it just meant that there was too many clips in general to make that discovery more palatable. But all of that aside, that the individual films themselves are quite winning. I think like I would probably watch any of those films were they actually made. And I think like so there are three films. The first one, it's called Ambrosio. It's based on The Monk, which is a real story, and it's a tale of a monk being seduced, and it's very. I mean, it's got this kind of Hitchcockian director, and a lot of the ways in which it's shot are quite reminiscent of filmmaking of like the late 50s and early 60s. You've got a lot of like beautiful split diopter shots, um, you've got luscious matte paintings and so forth, all kinds of like camera techniques that are kind of redolent of a very specific era of filmmaking, and yet it's sort of creaking dangerously towards like the 70s, the inherent horniness of the 70s, things that would have been forbidden in past decades now becoming permissible. And like the collision of those two things is really well articulated in the way that it is aesthetically constructed. And I found myself quite sort of like staggered by how precisely they had managed to pin like the filmmaking troubles of an exact moment in history.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that attention to detail mixed with characters who all feel basically real. I mean, the performances, I said it last week, but the performance in this game, I think, are just everyone's amazing. Everyone's brilliant. And it's what stops the game from, sort of driving off the cliff with all the boobage that's going on, is that the characters themselves are whole and complete people, even when they're not, And so uh, I think that is kind of the secret sauce of the whole game. And so like that first movie is a movie that you'd want to watch, and in a world that you'd want to spend time, and then the people making it are also, they just feel very period accurate. And I think that just can't be overstated. I think how good that aspect of the game is.
I also really enjoyed the second film, Minsky, which is a sort of like sexy gumshoe thriller.
Yeah.
I'm not as familiar with who specifically that is sort of pastiching. I was wondering if you had insight into exactly its sort of touchstones.
Yeah, I thought it existed in a weird sort of. There was a bit of Roman Polanski to it, and a little bit of Sidney Lumet.
Oh,
Sidney
really? Yeah.
Lumet movies from the 70s, John Cassavetes as well. Like a
Hmm.
lot of kind of movies that would end up kind of helping to define what indie movies would look like. Which makes sense if if the same director of that is the person who goes on to make Two of Everything, the final movie. No, I really enjoyed Minsky. Again, it felt like there's all this kind of chatter in it about Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol appears at one
Oh,
point,
yeah.
which is pretty cool. And I just like that kind of Chelsea hotel vibe. Again, the game is just overflowing with vibes. So I would definitely watch that movie too.
I didn't
Um,
jibe quite as well with Two of Everything. I think maybe because it's sort of harder to place what vibe it in fact has, because so much of it is maybe, I think more of Two of Everything is rehearsal footage, so it's kind of inherently divorced of most of the kind of the aesthetic that would lend it some sort of identity.
yeah, they don't get
Um,
too far through the making of that one before things go somewhat awry.
yeah.
I have to say I really liked, because it just reminded me of, because that one's 1999. I think they're making that
Hmm.
one, and that's when I was 14, and watching a lot of those kind of post Tarantino movies that kind of came out through the 90s that were kind of, indie. It's the kind of, I guess it's the kind of indie movement at the end of the 90s with Soderbergh and Tarantino and all those kind of pretender type movies. And I just thought that it just felt very accurate to that, and also very accurate to the slightly soulless feeling of the time as well. The feeling that it's quite that is the least interesting movie in and of itself, because it's kind of pretty basic.
I don't.
Pretty generic.
The other two films would survive as films, like for sure, because they have a plot. There are mystery elements to them. There is suspense. There is intrigue. Whereas True of Everything, the only intrigue that is lent it is in the non-linear way in which you discover the plot. I think if you put the plot in sequence, there would be no mystery at all to what happens. It just, things happen, and then that's it. I'm less certain. I'm less convinced of that as a sort of like standalone film.
I mean, and not to be the guy who's like, well, that's a feature, not a bug, but the fact that it's kind of less coherent and less easily identifiable, I think that is part of the story they're telling. Yeah,
definitely an interesting and worthwhile game to play. I'm really interested to see what that studio does next. Whether they stick with the sort of match cut interaction, because that's they've stuck with the word search for a few games, so maybe they'll hang on to this one for a while, or whether they'll try and evolve it further. I'm not quite sure where they would go with it now, or how they would limit its power, because that seems to be pretty key in how they prevent you from just unfolding the entire narrative from instantaneously.
Yeah, you don't want them to stray too far away from it, because I think I'm always going to play a Sam Barlow game, and one of the reasons I want to play them is because I know that he is incredibly he and his team are incredibly careful about expanding things. I mean, this is by far and away the most expansive game he's made, but he's taken his time getting there. And I'm like I said, I'm just fascinated with whatever he does next. I also just generally hope that there's more good FMV games to come. I'd love to write one day. I think it's a really like a space with a lot of potential, and a lot of potential for a lot of shite stuff, which has been the case for the entire history of video games pretty much so far. But that doesn't mean we can't start doing good ones now.
Some of the actors in this are a real find. Like I don't know their faces. They're obviously not super famous, but I hope that some of them do become super famous.
I mean, I think the lead is incredible. I think the Italian lady from Ambrosio is like really, really good. And there's a couple of really amazing scenes with her. But I generally think that everyone in it is really, really excellent. I think it's really impressive to that regard. And getting a good performance in one of these things, it's far rarer than it should be. But there you go.
More please, Sam.
More please, Sam. I think that article I mentioned ends by suggesting that he maybe make a game that isn't about women being watched by men, and I think that might be a good avenue to potentially explore.
Actually, all of his games have involved exactly that, haven't they?
Yeah, and maybe we want to start clicking on some knobs for a change.
That's all the pod we had time for this week. You can send us questions again, once more, to questions@crateandcrowbar.com. Not quite sure when we'll answer them, but we'll probably come back to it in a podcast at some point rather than end each podcast with a question section. You can also tweet us at Crate and Crowbar, and you can watch all of these recordings as videos on our YouTube channel, where you can find other nonsense by us. The address for that is youtube.com/Crate and Crowbar. Thanks as always to our backers on Patreon. You can back us too at patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. Thank you very much to those who do. Or you can simply join our lovely Discord community, the link for which is on our website, crateandcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been Marsh Davis.
I've been Jamie Britton.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. It's a weird thing to do with someone I've never met face to face.